Hey everybody, welcome to another off-the-shelf board game review. This week we're going to be doing a preview for a game that's been out in the digital format for about 4 years and is about to come out in the paper format, and that's the card game of Cabals. Cabals is a deck building game where each player is trying to defeat the other player's stronghold or win by getting complete dominance over the other players. Now the game of Cabals, like I said, has been out for about 4 years now, and I actually played the game when it first came out, but I didn't play it for that long for the simple reason that when you get those kind of games where you're playing a digital game, where you're purchasing digital content, I don't normally get too much in those games. For example, Hearthstone, online Magic the Gathering, or other games such as that, I don't play them that often. I play around with them to have fun with them, but once you get into that really deep paywall, that's usually when I back away and move on to another game. And that's why when the producers of the game Cabals contacted me and asked me if I was willing to do a preview of the game, I agreed to do that. Now this isn't a paid preview or anything like that, and as a matter of fact, this is a very print and play preview where they basically just sent me a whole bunch of printed out components that were cut out with scissors. So you can see most of these components are basically really rough, but they do give you a basic idea of how the game plays. But that's enough talk. Let's take everything to the table and show you exactly how to play Cabals, and afterwards I'll give you an opinion of exactly what I think about the basic game so far. In Cabals the game, players are members of secret societies led by a hero that gives them access to very powerful spells and even powerful units seeking to defeat the other Cabals. Players will gain victory by either moving one of their units into an opponent's stronghold or by getting complete dominance over the other player and winning the game. It's not quite that simple though, because players will need to control areas of the board that give them extra power, which are going to give them the power to summon spells and bring out more units, and also need to control areas that are going to allow them to bring their units onto the board in the first place. Players can control these special places with their units, or they can control these locations by using their relics, which are also going to give them the dominance, which can also help them win the game. You see, players are going to get dominance in one of two different ways. One, they're going to have more relics on the board than any other player currently playing the game, or they're going to get dominance by using their units to go out there and attack the other player's relics. The first person to get 5 total dominance is going to win the game. So you actually have two kind of cat and mouse games going on at the same time. You have the cat and mouse game of trying to capture your opponent's stronghold, and you also have the cat and mouse game of getting your relics out there so you can get the complete dominance to also win the game before your stronghold is ever touched. Can you expertly maneuver around the board to gain the power you need to bring your units into play, to cast your spells, to protect your relics, and protect your stronghold? That is Cabals, the card game. Before I show you how to play Cabals the game, there's a couple really basic concepts you need to understand, and the rest of the game is going to make a heck of a lot more sense. The first thing you need to understand is that every player is going to be controlling a deck of at least 30 cards, and these are going to be customizable decks where the player is going to build a deck of cards. They're going to have spell cards in them, and they're going to have unit cards in them, and then everybody's going to build up their deck of at least 30 cards, and then you're going to play against another player, and this game does play anywhere from 2 to 4 players. Now every single player is going to get their own special Cabal deck of cards, and every one of these Cabals is led by a single hero. Now every one of these heroes has a certain affiliation of clans or Cabals that they'll only work with, and it's color coded, so if you need to figure out exactly how it works, it's color coded for you to figure out. Basically any hero with a matching symbol that matches the hero, which matches the deck of cards or the unit cards, that hero can work with that specific clan. So this hero right here, can work with this clan right here because this symbol matches all the cards that happen to be in this clan deck. Whereas you have this hero right here who has a different symbol. It's a blue square symbol. You know that his symbol matches all the cards in this deck. So you know that this hero right here can work with this deck of cards. Now that matters because you can have some heroes that can have double affiliations, such as this hero. You see here that he has the blue and the green symbol with him. That means that he can be a hero either for this clan or this Cabal, or he can be a hero for this Cabal, and you see the symbol of the green symbols match his symbol, and he can be a hero for this Cabal right here. He can also be a hero for this Cabal because, again, his symbol happens to match. Your hero, though, is never actually represented on the board. It's basically a card. Just to simplify things, it's going to be a card that's going to give you a one-time use special ability that you can use at any time to help your units across the board. But just remember, certain heroes will only work with certain Cabals, so you can't mix them up at all, and you have to make sure that symbol is perfectly matching, so you're matching the right heroes with the correct Cabals. The other thing to understand about the game is the game board itself. Now this game board has a whole bunch of symbols on it, And these symbols are very, very important because they're going to allow you to get the resources you're going to need to bring out your units and to also cast your spells. At the beginning of the game, every player is going to start with one single stronghold and it's going to have a relic attached to it. And that relic is basically attached to your faction for this game only. And you're going to have control of that area for the entire game because the way this game works is you only control an area if you happen to have one of your relics on that location or if you happen to have one of your units on that location. Those are the only two ways to control those squares or those locations. So at the start of the game, every player's stronghold is going to start with a relic in play. It's actually pre-printed on the board so you don't have to remember to do so. But it's also going to let you know that you do control that location and let you know that you always have access to all the bonuses that specific location gives you. The other thing to understand about Cabals the game is you need to control certain areas of the board because certain areas of the board are going to give you special abilities that are going to help you win. At the start of every single game, players are going to start off controlling one stronghold apiece, and that's also going to have a relic attached to it. Now, relics have two purposes in the game. The first thing a relic can do is it's going to help you control an area. And the second thing that it's going to do is at the start of every single turn, you're going to figure out who has the most relics on the board. Whoever has the most relics on the board is going to gain a dominance token. And remember, the first player to get 5 dominance tokens is going to be the winner of the game. So getting these relics out on the board is very important. And destroying your opponent's relics is also very, very important because not only are you making them lose access to certain sections of the board when you destroy one of their relics, you're also helping your dominance, which is going to help you win the game. Certain sections of the board are going to give each player certain special abilities. For example, every player's starting stronghold. Now remember, you start with a relic at your starting stronghold, so you always control this area. So you're always going to get the benefits of this area. It's going to be listed on this exact area, what exactly you're going to get from controlling that area. It's going to show at the start of the game these 2 star patterns, which shows that you're going to get 2 of these stars, which are the resources for the game. And these resources are going to be used to bring your cards, your units, and your spells into play. No resources, no spells, so remember, you want to get as many of these as possible. And you're going to notice that there's more of them out on the board, and you're going to get a cumulative amount of power or the resource every single turn, depending on how many of these power areas you happen to control at the start of your turn. Now remember, you control a certain section of the board with one of 2 ways. Either you happen to have your relic on that location, which means you control that location as long as your relic is present, or the other way, you control an area that have one of your units currently at that location. At the start of every single turn, you're going to simply add up all the stars for all the locations you control. And don't get confused and think that this is actually 4 stars. This is just so people can see the board from all 4 sides. Since this game does play up to 4 players, it's a nice reminder that you get 1 power for controlling this area. Again, you gain 2 power for controlling your stronghold. And if you happen to have your relic at a location, you're also going to gain the benefits from that location. So in this example, this player at the start of the game would gain 2 + 1 + 1, a total of 4 power at the start of their turn. The game of Cabals is also going to release with a customizable board, which means you can change the layout of the board every single time you play it. But just to go over the symbols that could potentially be on the board every time you play the game, this symbol that looks like a pawn being placed down the ground lets you know that if you happen to control this location, you can bring your units into play from this location, because normally when you play the game, you can only bring your units into play from the stronghold. But if you happen to start controlling these other locations, you can actually start creating one heck of an advance on your opponents, because you can start bringing units into play at any one of these locations as long as you control it if it has this symbol on the board. The other symbol on the board, and this is only for my copy of the game, again remember this is a print and play version of the game. There could be other board layouts and other things on the board, but the other symbol you're going to see on the board is a plus card symbol. And that means as long as you control that area, you're going to draw 1 card at the start of your turn. Now remember, since this is a customizable board style game, there is the potential, there may be other areas like this that you can control that allow you to draw more cards. So that does become a fact. Those are going to be other areas you're going to be contesting for, because this is definitely one of those games where the more cards you have in your hand, the more options you definitely have on your turn. Each player is going to have 2 kinds of cards in their draw deck and in their hand. The first kind of cards they're going to have is they're going to have spells, and they say spells right on the card here, so you know that's what they are. And the other kind of cards you can potentially have in your hand or your deck are going to be units. Now every one of these cards is going to have a cost to bring into play, and that's going to be the upper left-hand corner of the game, and that cost is a resource. And remember, you get these resources by controlling these areas at the start of your turn, which are going to give you resources, which you're going to use to bring these cards into play. These cards can have anywhere from a cost of 1 all the way up to a cost of 9. And basically spell cards are going to be paid for, and their effect is going to go into effect and they're going to be taken care of, and then generally the card is going to be discarded if it's a spell card. But if it happens to be a unit card, the card is going to come into play and it's going to enter the board at one of the locations that you control that allows you to summon your units into play. Now every one of these units is going to have two statistics on them. They're going to have their attack power, which is how much damage they're going to do when they fight an enemy unit, and then they're going to have the amount of hit points they have, which is how much damage they can take before they get destroyed. Now some units have no special abilities, and some units happen to have special abilities, and you're basically going to read the text and it's going to tell you what to do to go ahead and activate that special ability. The final thing you need to understand is the term for exhaustion. Now exhaustion is a term that's very familiar for anybody who's played these style of games. It's been called bow, it's been called tapping, it's been called exhausting, it's been called using. But basically what it means is you're going to turn the card sideways to signify that he's done some kind of action that's exhausted the unit, and that unit can no longer perform any actions that requires you to exhaust that unit. Now some units have special powers such as this card, which doesn't require you to exhaust the unit to use its special power, while other units have special powers that are going to have a symbol for exhausting on it. And if you want to use a special power of that unit, you do need to exhaust that unit to use its special power. Now exhausting isn't too big of a deal. It doesn't hurt the unit, but it does mean that unit can no longer perform any actions which require exhausting that unit. Now movement is an action that requires exhausting, and some other things or abilities require exhausting. So if you want to do anything that requires unit to be exhausted, it can't be already exhausted to perform those actions. So once I exhaust this card to use its special ability, I can't move with it anymore, which means I can't attack with it anymore, and there's other things I can no longer do with that unit. The final thing to understand about this card game is that this game has something called relics. Now relics are very, very interesting, and what relics are going to allow you to do is they're going to help you win the game, and they're also going to allow you to control certain sections of the board. Now remember what I told you earlier, that if a relic is down at a certain location, and that location happens to have a special power, as long as your relic happens to be at that location, you're going to get that bonus of that location for the rest of the game at the start of your turn, again, as long as you keep control of that location. Now on a unit's turn, a unit, whether it's exhausted or not, has the option of taking any one of your 3 relics that are currently in your reliquary. Now it can't be in your en route section. I'll explain how that happens in just a moment. But if you're currently at any location on the board, one of your units can drop one of their relics at their current location. Now you don't have to drop a relic at a location with one of these special symbols. You can actually drop it anywhere you want. And now why would you want to drop it anywhere you want? Well, because if you have more of these relics on the board than your opponent does, you're going to get dominance every turn. And remember, it only takes 5 of these dominance tokens right here to win the game. Back on point though, on a player's turn, one of their units can easily drop a relic at one of their current locations, whether the unit happens to be exhausted or not. But you have to be very, very careful, because if one of your opponents manages to move one of their units onto a space where you currently have a relic, they immediately destroy that relic, and it's going to go back to your en route part of your Cabal card, which means that relic is no longer usable by your faction for this turn. It's going to refresh at the start of your next turn, but that doesn't mean that this relic is not usable at the start or for the rest of this turn for your army or for your secret society. So if some player manages to destroy all 3 of your relics in one single turn, puts them all in the route section of the board, you're going to lose access to all of your relics for the rest of the turn, meaning you don't get the bonuses for having them in these locations and control these locations, and also mean that your opponent is probably going to start getting dominance over you, possibly winning the game. To play the game of Cabals, each player is going to start with a deck of 30 cards, and these are going to be pre-made decks where the player is going to make before the game even starts. This is a deck building game. The only rules for the deck is that you have to have at least a minimum of 30 cards in your deck, and you can't have more than 3 copies of any single card in your deck. Players are going to pick their deck of cards, build their deck so they're ready to fight their opponent. Now remember, before we go anywhere, remember this is all print and play. That's why you're seeing the white backs to all these cards. The final components are not going to look like this. Again, print and play, just to give you an idea of exactly how the game plays. After players build their deck of cards, they're going to pick a hero who has a matching loyalty to the current Cabal, and then players are basically ready to play the game. Each player is going to draw a hand of 7 cards, and you're going to keep your hand of cards separate from your opponent so they don't exceed exactly what kind of cards you're going to start with. Nobody starts with anything on the game board at the start of the game. And after everybody's drawn their hand of 7 cards, you're ready to start the game. Now for the very first round of the game, the first player, whoever you pick to be the first player, whatever method you choose to pick, In this example, we're going to say that this Cabal right here is going to be player number 1. At the start of the very first round, player 1 is not going to draw their card at the start of the game. And player number 2, as a bonus, they're going to get 1 extra free resource at the start of the round. Now, these are bonuses only for the very first round. Again, player 1 does not get their free card draw at the start of the round. And player 2 is going to get 1 free extra resource to use on their turn. Cabals is played over turns, and a player is going to do all their actions on one turn, ending their turn, and then everything's going to move to the next player in line. On a player's turn, the very first action they need to do is draw a card. But if this happens to be the very first turn of the game, remember the first player skips the draw phase, and we're going to move on to the next phase. Now, the amount of cards you're going to draw on your turn is going to be based on however many areas you control with the draw card symbol. Now, for this basic set, there's only one symbol on this entire board for each single player, and that happens to be also on your stronghold. So you're never going to draw more than one card for this demonstration here, because remember, once you control the other player's stronghold, you do win the game. So every single player, since their relic or a relic is going to start in play for every single player, at the start of the turn, every player is going to get to draw one single card, except for the very first player, skipping the very first player's turn. Next, you get to gain resources based on however many resource spaces you currently control. Now remember, you always control the starting resource space, so you're always going to get at least 2 resources on your turn, and these are going to be used to bring your spells and your units into play. But if you happen to control any of the other areas across the board that are going to give you resources, and in this example there do happen to be 4 of these spaces currently on the board, you can either control them by having a unit on one of those locations, or by having one of your relics on those locations. And if you happen to do that, you're going to gain the resources for those spaces. So in this example, this was the starting layout for each player. They would gain a total of 1, 2, plus 2, a total of 4 resources at the start of their turn. Next, the players are going to count up how much domination they currently have over the board. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to figure out if you happen to have more relics currently on the board than your opponent. If you happen to have more relics on the board than your opponent, you're going to gain 1 point of dominance. And remember, if you happen to get 5 points of dominance, you do win the game. Next, any of your relics that happen to be in route space on your card are going to move into your reliquary, which means they're ready to be placed on the board by your units if you have any units currently on the board. And then finally, if you happen to have any units currently on the board and they're exhausted because you used any of their abilities on a prior turn, they're all going to be refreshed so you can use them on your turn. That ends the upkeep phase for your turn, and now it comes to the action part of your turn, where you get to do any actions you want as long as you have the ability to pay for them and you have the unexhausted units to use to perform any of these actions. There's a couple different actions you can do on your turn. You can deploy a unit onto the board to any one of the locations that you currently control that allow you to deploy units. And remember, you want to look for this symbol right here, and if you control those areas, you can deploy a unit to that area. You're simply going to pay the cost of that unit, in this case 2 resources, to bring this unit into play. And since this is the start of the game, the only place I can bring them into play is at my starting stronghold, and I can bring that unit into play. The next thing I can do on my turn, if I want, is I can exhaust a unit to move one of my units orthogonally. Now, you cannot move in this game diagonally. It's either left and right or forward and backwards. Those are the only directions you can move your units. And you simply exhaust your unit and move them into the location you want to move them into. And remember, though, if you happen to exhaust your unit and move them into an opponent's stronghold, you do instantly win the game. The next thing you can do on your turn is you can exhaust one of your units to go ahead and attack a unit that happens to be in your way, either forward or backwards or left or right. And the way you're going to do that is you're simply going to exhaust your unit and you're going to initiate combat with an opposing unit. To do combat with another unit, you're simply going to compare what your attack strength is, and you're going to do that amount of damage to the opponent, and then you're going to see if you manage to defeat that opponent, and if you did defeat them, you're going to move into the space that they just occupied. Before you deal any damage, though, you need to make sure that you check for any special abilities that happen to be on these units that happen to be involved in this combat. Special abilities such as toughness, which is going to make that unit take less damage. Special abilities such as first strike, which allows that unit to do all their damage to their opponent. And if that damage does kill their opponent, that opponent doesn't get to strike back. Or slowness, which means that they take all their damage, and if they don't survive that damage, they do not get to strike back at all. So to figure out damage between our 2 units here who happen to be in this fight, this unit has a strength of 1, and this unit also has a strength of 1. Neither one of them has toughness, neither one of them has any first strike, so no special abilities or slowness are going to happen before this fight even starts. So this unit right here is going to do 1 point of damage to this unit right here. And then this unit, since there's no special ability stopping it, gets to do 1 point of damage back to this unit. After all the damage has been done for all of our units, we're going to see if they happen to have enough hit points left over to survive the damage. We're going to see that this unit has 1 hit point. He has 1 point of damage, so he's going to be defeated and removed from the board. We're going to see that this unit has 1 hit point and 1 point of damage, so he's also going to be removed from the board. Now, if this battle had been a little bit different, if we had a tougher unit out on the board before this fight even started, the results would have looked a little bit different. If we initiated the combat between these two units right here, we look to see if there's any special abilities that are going to happen before the combat even starts. If there are no special abilities that are going to happen, we're going to go ahead and figure out the damage that's going to be caused between these two units. First, the attacker is going to go ahead and do 3 points of damage versus this unit right here. And then this unit is going to do 1 point of damage back to our attacker. Then we're going to figure out if they survive the battle. This unit has 3 points of damage on it. It only has 1 hit point, so he's going to be defeated and removed from the board. And since this unit has 3 hit points and only 1 point of damage, he's going to survive. And he's going to move into the space that was occupied by this unit with 1 hit point down. Still has 2 hit points left and the ability to survive for a little bit longer. The other thing you can do on your turn is if you happen to have any units on the board that have special abilities, you can go ahead and activate any of those special abilities. And you simply just do what the text tells you to do. For example, this unit tells you to exhaust this unit to go ahead and generate 1 point of resource, which you can use at any point. You can even use it immediately when you bring it onto the board. And there are other special abilities. Some units will allow you to increase your attack power. Some units will allow you to increase the amount of hit points you have. And there's various special things you can do to make your unit stronger so you can start attacking your opponent. The next thing you can do on your turn is if you happen to have any relics currently in your reliquary, you can put them on a board in any current location where you currently have a unit. Now, you kind of want to make sure you're putting these relics down in places that are going to give you special powers, but remember there is a bonus to having more relics on the board than your opponent, so sometimes it may be worth it to keep some of your relics back and keep them away from your opponent so they're not targets for your opponent. Because remember, if your opponent destroys one of your relics, they're going to gain 1 point of dominance for destroying your relic, and it only takes 5 points of dominance to win the game. So you want to protect your relics, but you want to also put them out there on the special locations to get the special abilities. So it's kind of a balancing game you're constantly doing. Although, if you do notice that one of your relics is becoming too much of a target for one of your opponents, and you realize that you have no way of protecting that relic at all, you are free to move one of your units onto a location where you currently have a relic, pick that relic up and put it on the en route space on your faction board, which does mean you can't put it back on the board this turn, but at least it's not going to be destroyed by your opponent, and at least you're not going to be giving free dominance to your opponent. And to pick up a relic, you simply need to be at the exact same space where a relic currently is at. Whether you move to that space to pick it up, or whether you just happen to already be at that space, you simply take the relic, pick it up off the board, and put it back to the route space on your faction board, and you know it's off the board and safe from your opponent's attacks. The next thing you can do on your turn is you can use your hero ability. Now, your hero abilities are very, very important because they can only be used once per game. They're pretty powerful. Some of them do have a requirement. Like you see, this one takes 2 resources to use that special ability, but it doesn't take any cards to use. This is basically a very powerful card that's always in play, that has a one-time use. Pay the cost, gain the benefit, and you get access to that 1 time per game. The final action you can do on your turn is you can cast a spell by simply paying the cost in resources for the spell, following the instructions on the spell, and carrying out whatever that spell tells you to do. For example, casting this spell right here for 2 power would permanently give this unit right here 1 more hit point that it can use. That's going to keep it alive a little bit longer. It would also give that unit a little bit of toughness, which means he's going to take less damage from opposing units, which means a strength 1 creature can no longer even damage this unit at all, meaning that he's immune to damage from this guy, which makes him even more powerful. And this card would also tell you, after you do all that stuff, you're simply going to draw 1 more card. You do have to be very careful though, for if at any time the game tells you to draw a card, whether it's because you're at the start of the round and you're forced to draw a card, or if you just happen to play a card that tells you to draw a card, if you have no cards left to draw, you give your opponent 1 point of dominance every time you have to draw a card and you cannot. And remember, 5 points of dominance and you win the game. After you finish your main phase, either because you no longer want to take actions or because you no longer can take actions, Your turn is going to end and now moves to the other player's turn, who's going to start by drawing cards, gaining resources, checking for dominance because they may or may not have more relics on the board, move the relics over into the reliquary so their relics are ready to be placed on the board if they like. They then ready any units that happen to have been exhausted on the prior turn, and then they're now ready to start their main phase. The game is going to continue like this, going back and forth with every player taking an upkeep and a main phase till one player either manages to move one of their units into an opponent's stronghold, winning the game, or one player manages to get 5 points of dominance, also winning the game. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial for how to play the game of Cabals. I'm going to go ahead and clean everything up and show you some sample gameplay, and this is all going to come together very smoothly, and you're going to see just how quick and easy Cabals the game truly does play.